Today we're going to have a quick look at Alfred Lord Tennyson's The Charge of the Light Brigade. I would say to be successful, you might want to have a copy of the poem in front of you. So, what is the poem The Charge of the Light Brigade about? Well, we'll start by saying the poem was written in 1854, and it tells the story of a brave but suicidal British cavalry charge during the Crimean War. In particular, we have Lord Cardigan, who's attacking the valley with 673 cavalrymen, and the British were surrounded by cannons, and in minutes, half of these cavalrymen were dead. So when we take a look at the history and we see Lord Alfred Tennyson putting it into a poem, how does he do that? What happens? Well, he starts by saying the Light Brigade was moved into their position. They moved into the valley. The order comes to charge for the guns, and the men charge. They don't ask the reason as to why, and we find out then that they're surrounded by cannon on all sides, but they continue to ride boldly. We also hear in the poem that they disappear into the smoke, that the enemy lines are shattered, but the brigade's losses have been terrible. Nevertheless, the last stanza asks the readers to honor the Light Brigade for their fateful charge. So what meanings can we get from this poem? Well, the poem suggests that the experience of battle can be both thrilling and terrifying at the same time. It also suggests that the sacrifice and the bravery of these British soldiers should be celebrated. Now, some readers have been critical of the poem. They think that the poem is too patriotic and it glorifies the war. After all, the wild charge is called noble. On the other hand, though, Tennyson does realize that perhaps this was a sacrifice and it was perhaps not the brightest idea, because Tennyson may use the poem to criticize the British generals because he says they have blundered. So then how does the author use language and imagery in the poem? Well, what could we use in order to describe the voice? Certainly, as we said before, a lot of people see this as glorifying the event, and it's very patriotic. We should honor the charge that they've made. We can also look at it as a point from the soldiers, where they are breathless and excited. Oh, the wild charge that they made. So who is telling us the poem? Well, the speaker could be an excited observer, maybe a proud British patriot, but because they also think that the generals have blundered, they could also be someone who is very critical of the generals. So you do have to ask, why are they writing the poem? So when we take a look at Tennyson's use of repetition, it's very significant throughout the poem. A good example of this is the anaphora that you have in every stanza of the poem. For example, we have half a league, half a league, half a league onward. We also have in another stanza, cannon to the right of them, cannon to the left of them, cannon behind them. Now, the first quotation conveys a sense of unstoppable movement, half a league, half a league, half a league onward. You almost feel the horses beneath you charging forward. But then the second reinforces that the men are trapped. All of a sudden that movement is stopped. Cannon to the right of them. Cannon to the left of them. Cannon behind them. They can't move anywhere but forward. We also have very graphic imagery, such as they are charging into the mouth of hell. Now this would personify the horror of war. It would also imply a sense of a religious theme. And then when we also look at some of the other languages, like for example, we have the words stormed and thundered, which would give imagery of violent weather, But instead of talking about the weather, it is talking about what they are experiencing from the actual battle, how they have been stormed, and how you hear the cannons being thundered. You also have the sense of onomatopoeia with stormed and thundered, and you also have the words shattered and sundered, which recreates the noise and the result of the battle. So then we ask, how does the author use the structure and the form of the poem? Well, we can see that there's an unstoppable rhythm and regular rhyme. Again, probably to help move the poem forward as you feel the sense of the cavalry charge. He's using the structure of the poem and using the rhythm and rhyme in order to give us that sense of movement. Theirs is not to make reply. Theirs not to reason why. Theirs but to do and die. Now the rhythm gives the poem its energy, recreating the surge of the cavalry charge. You can almost hear the hooves of the horses in the rhythm. The rhyme also helps to keep up this forward momentum, as if the reader, like the horses, cannot turn back. You have to keep charging forward into the poem. But then can you also feel a sense of reckless madness in the pounding rhythm? Not only with the words that are being used, that there's this madness that you just can't make any decision. You just have to keep moving forward. Theirs not to make reply. Theirs not to reason why. Theirs but to do and die. So overall, when we take a look at some of the words that are being used, what is Tennyson attempting to do? Well, he's definitely celebrating the heroism of the brigade. You see the words glory and honor and noble. We're not going to see the personal terror of an individual man, but we're celebrating the heroism of the entire brigade as one. You also hear about the Cossack and the Russian, the people that the Light Brigade is going against. Now, the Light Brigade lost this battle. Do you get this sense from it in the rhythm? Is there some sense of propaganda? We hear almost nothing about the other side. So when we look at the enemy and their appearance in stanza 4, we get very little of them, other than you might perhaps think cannon to the right of them, cannon to the left of them, cannon behind them. You kind of feel this sense of trapped. You can kind of feel the sense that this Light Brigade has sacrificed itself to the Cossack and the Russian. And there might be a bit of criticism as well. Who is to blame? Someone had blundered is written into the poem. So what does this line suggest about the roles of soldiers and generals in a battle? Well, you hear the charge of the Light Brigade, so everyone should be involved, including the generals, right? And yet you hear half of the Light Brigade does not come back. And someone had blundered because of it. Who else could be blamed but the person in charge, the general? Thank you so much for stopping by for a quick look at Alfred Lord Tennyson's Charge of the Light Brigade. If you'd like to learn more about poetry or maybe perhaps about some literature, please check out my other videos on my channel. Thanks so much for stopping by.